Another edition of the Aggie Overtime Zoomcast. I'm Scott Marsh, your voice of the Aggies, and we continue to talk to some of the all-time Aggie greats. And today, certainly no different for anybody who follows track and field or certainly follows the UC Davis Aggies. They'll know this familiar face, Kim Conley. And Kim, thank you so much for being a part of our Zoomcast. I know that you are in preparation for another Olympic trials that's coming up here in a few months. So we really feel special that you are taking the time to spend with us here this afternoon.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So catch us up because you've been through two Olympics already. You participated in London and in Rio. Just talk about that process getting ready for this Olympics under a pandemic and it being moved back a year and just how crazy it is in your world right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just completely different. We can't use the template that we've had for the last two Olympic cycles, partly because now it's operating on it's a 5-year cycle from the last one, but also because we can't rely on all of the same competitions that we would have had to build up to the Olympic trials. And professional running relies heavily on NC2A and race opportunities tied to the collegiate system. And there's just no telling what's going to come back. And it makes a lot of sense that colleges would serve their athletes first. That's appropriate. So I think there will be more like small meets that emerge first. But professional athletes are having to get creative to create their own race opportunities that aren't tied to the collegiate system anymore. So it all just looks very new and different than compared to what it ever has before.
I can only imagine. Do you feel pretty confident at this point that the Olympics will happen? Are you getting the vibe that they will go on?
Well, I definitely get the vibe from other athletes and people in the sport that they will go on. I still find it hard to believe that they will, just from following the news myself.
Yeah.
So I am operating every day as if they will. But, I know in the back of my mind that, there might be another pivot coming later this spring. We'll see.
Yeah, one day at a time. I think we're all living that. And certainly you are in your role too. And just talk about it being a competitive athlete and having to deal with a pandemic. Has it been not just only a challenge, but you talk about just, I can tell just personally, you're questioning if it can happen or not. Has it been a conflict for you in terms of how you go about and participating in races and everything else that you have to do to be an elite athlete?
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody's handling it differently. And I guess on some level, it comes down to like personal choices and the levels of risk that you're comfortable with. But right now, in order to compete, you need to have 2 negative COVID-19 tests within the week of the race. And personally, I'm opting not to fly anywhere. So I'm only going to races that are like reasonably within driving distance. But, even with those like safeguards in place, there's still athletes that are flying all over for races. And, and if you get 2 negative tests, like 6 and 7 days out from the race, and then you fly to a race, like there's huge chance of exposure in that time period. So it's definitely like an interesting challenge to navigate what feels like safe and appropriate. And then balancing that with, this is my career. And I need to race in order, if the Olympic trials do happen, to be at my best in June. So it's definitely a challenge.
It is such a challenge, and I can feel it coming through the screen, and I can really appreciate everything you're saying. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And we all feel for you, because obviously it's such a confined space of time that you have to compete, and to compete at such an elite level. And so there's so much going on there, and we wish you the best in that respect. I would like to focus in a little bit on your UC Davis life and just your background for people who aren't maybe as familiar. You came to UC Davis from Santa Rosa, where you went to high school in that area, originally born in the United Kingdom. That will come into play here in a moment or two, but just talk about how you found UC Davis, because in that era of UC Davis athletics, it was kind of a Division II school that was just moving into the Division I era of sports.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of like teenage illogic, I'll call it, that went into it. But there in Santa Rosa, there are a lot of people that went to Davis. It's like definitely a community that has a lot of Davis alums. So I knew from like coaches and teachers, like people that had gone to Davis and loved it. And I remember like in 8th grade being told about Davis, and it was described as like this college utopia where everybody biked everywhere and the campus was closed to cars. And I just formed this great image as like a 14-year-old. And I even asked my parents that Christmas for a bike. And when I got it, I told them that I was taking it to Davis with me one day. And I did. So when it was Coach Jason Jakes going into my senior year of high school called me as the coach at Davis at the time, I told him right away, like, Davis is my dream school. I've been wanting to go there since 8th grade. And so I was an early signee and did bring that bike to Davis. It got stolen eventually, like, most freshmen go.
Nobody's had that happen once everywhere.
But it was always the school that I wanted to go to. And when I took my recruit visit, I loved the team. And I remember going to class with some upperclassmen in exercise bio, and James Shafrath was the professor. And I was just swept up in it all. I really loved it right from the outset.
Yeah, I can understand that happening. Life at UC Davis can do that. And certainly from a track perspective, you were so fortunate. Deanne Vochatzer was the head coach. And of course, she was also one of the Olympic coaches for the 96 team. Just talk about her influence on your life and your track career.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely remember sitting in her office on my recruit visit and just kind of being blown away by the aura. And she had a picture of herself shaking hands with Bill Clinton on the wall.
It's a good recruiting tool, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, I mean, that always, like, she kind of represented to me the highest level of sport, even in a way like beyond what I could imagine back then. But yeah, I mean, I remember all her USA gear. I remember like going through the office one evening before class, and it was getting cold and I hadn't dressed appropriately. And so I got a USA jacket from her and then like proudly wore her USA jacket to class. But yeah, she was a very, very positive influence and someone that I always really looked up to and respected.
Yeah. Was she, I mean, obviously you were self-motivated, but was she a motivating factor to you in terms of your career and wanting to get into the Olympics? Because obviously when you came to Davis, you weren't necessarily a nationally heralded, like, sure to be an American Olympian.
No, yeah, not at all. And even at my time at Davis, I was too far from that level to even seriously think about it. I think, if anything, she influenced me in the idea of like wanting to coach and follow in her footsteps in that regard. And so I stayed on at Davis after I graduated as an assistant coach, but I continued to train. And I think because I was learning so much about the profession and about how to train distance runners and how to maximize potential and motivate athletes, and, kind of like putting that all together to really like get the most out of an athlete, I really developed an appreciation for the purpose behind everything I was doing in my own training. And so that was like a big step that allowed me to make that jump in those 3 years after college, kind of like bleeding the coaching and then my own running together.
Yeah, we're talking with Kim Conley here. It is the Aggie Overtime Zoomcast brought to you by UC Davis Health. UC Davis Health, connecting Aggies to world-class care from experts in adult and pediatric medicine, the specialists who support your active lifestyle. You'll always have a partner in your care. Find your doctor today at health.ucdavis.edu/Aggies. And of course, after Deanne moved on, Drew Wartenberg, of course, you developed a very special relationship with him to this day, but he kind of coached you in your running and just talk about that transition and how you got from UC Davis to being such an elite runner.
Yeah, I mean, so it happened in that time period right after I had graduated from Davis and I was coaching in the program. And And the beauty of going to Davis was, in D as a coach and the head coach, and and I had a few different distance coaches over the years, but D was very much in charge. Was I just really developed like an appreciation for the process, and I was allowed to just focus on like continual improvement every year. And so I was in the midst of what ended up being a 16-year PR streak, where every season I was just chopping more and more time off my PRs. And so that trend continued after college. And so when I graduated, so in order to make the Olympic team, you have to have run the Olympic standard and finish in the top 3 at the Olympic trials. So when I graduated from Davis, my 5,000 meter PR was over a minute slower than the Olympic standard. But in those first 3 years out of college, I just like kept improving. And so by the time I got to the Olympic trials 3 years later, my time was only 5 seconds lower than the Olympic standard. So that's how I kind of like became poised to make it as a professional. But I didn't actually sign my endorsement contract with New Balance until I made that Olympic team. And so those first 3 years were very much kind of like just being a post-collegiate runner, trying to get the most out of myself.
Yeah, we have to talk about the 2012 Olympic trial. Obviously, I know you've talked about it probably at every interview that you've done at some point or another, but it is such an amazing story. You're trying out for the Olympic team. As you talked about, you had to not only win the heat in terms of being in the top 3, but you also had to have that right qualifying time to get in. Just talk about that experience, because you were in 5th place to the very, very last stage of the race. You were able to get to 3rd by 0.4 hundredths of a second. And you also hit the qualifying time for the Olympics by 21 hundredths of a second. So just talk about that moment and the elation that you felt afterwards, and just relive that for us if you could, back in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a shocking outcome, really. I mean, on the one hand, I went into the race believing that I could do it, because like I say, I had been chopping time off my PRs all the time. It was just kind of what I did. I never had a huge breakthrough where I took tons of time off a PR. It was always these like little improvements that added up over the years. And so going into that race, I knew that in order to get the Olympic standard, I had to PR by 5 seconds, and PRing by 5 seconds was just what I did. I was just, it was very much within my grasp. And then from following the other Americans, throughout the season, I knew I could contend for a top 3 finish. I'd actually written on my goal sheet top 5 finish because I thought that was more realistic. Yeah. But I knew in my heart, the way the race unfolded, the difference between 3rd place and 5th place was a fraction of a second. So I knew that it was definitely possible, and it just wasn't very probable that both things would happen in that same moment. But I went into the race really just happy and without a lot of pressure. There were lots of athletes in the race that I think did feel pressure, because when you're a professional athlete, sorry.
That's okay. The world is, totally upside down in many ways.
So I went into the race really just like feeling happy to be there. Like when I graduated from UC Davis, I had failed to make it to NC2As on the track while at college, which was a huge disappointment. And so I set this goal of being at the Olympic trials, because I felt like that would kind of like fulfill those other dreams that hadn't come to pass in college. So to get there 3 years later and know that I could actually, maybe contend to be on the Olympic team, it was just like very, very exciting. And then the way the race unfolded, I kind of fell apart for a little bit, and I faded back as far as 8th place. And then I heard Drew yelling for me, and it just kind of like snapped me out of my little funk and reminded me that we'd worked so hard and been on such a great journey. At the very least, I just had to finish with everything I had in me. And so I regrouped and I worked my way back into 5th place. And then that's when I saw that the 3rd place finisher was really struggling because she'd made a hard move with 3 laps to go and she was paying for it. And so I had looked at the clock and I thought that there was no way we could get the Olympic standard. So I didn't think I could make the Olympic team at all. But I was just suddenly inspired by the idea of standing on the podium at the Olympic trials. So I just really wanted to finish in third place. And so that's when I started bearing down to try to catch third place. And it all happened in the last 100 meters. And I could hear the roar of the crowd, just watching this drama unfolding before them. And so I knew it was happening. I knew I was gaining on her. And then I leaned at the line and I ended up taking third place by 0.04 and getting under that Olympic standard by 0.21. And so to have it happen, like when I finished the race, I thought I'd taken third. I didn't think I would have run the Olympic standard. So I just kind of stood there, really preparing myself to go into the mixed zone and put on a brave face, because I thought I was going to be third place, but not an Olympian. So I was kind of like trying to come up with some things that I'd say to the media that would like put a positive spin on my outlook for 2016 or whatever. And then they had to analyze the photo finish. So there was like this lag, and then finally the results appeared and the Olympic rings were next to my name. And so that's when it was just like so shocking and exciting that I'd actually made the Olympic team.
That's a Hollywood script right there. And I mean, it's just, it's the quintessential UC Davis story of the underdog coming out and just doing incredible things. So here you are, you qualified in the 5,000 meters, and then you're going to London in 2012. And I know you only lived in the United Kingdom for 7 months, but here you are going home. Your parents are obviously proud for so many levels, but on top of that, it's a homecoming for the family as well. Just talk about competing at the London Olympics.
Yeah, it really was. My family they were so thrilled. My mom is very tied to her British roots, and I have family still in England. And so they all got tickets to come, and they were so thrilled by it. And the London Olympics were just spectacular. Stepping out into the stadium and being on that track, and it's 80,000 people packed in the stands. And the energy was just absolutely amazing. But I do have kind of a really random and funny little anecdote from that moment. I remember stepping onto the track, and it was just so noisy, like a noise level I'd never experienced. And then all of a sudden I heard, Kimmy. And I was like, what? And I look up in the stands, and the Petersons, Drew Peterson, who is now the coach at Davis, and his parents and family, they were all there watching. And we were just waving at each other, and it just really shrunk the world down again, which was pretty funny to have, a family I knew from Davis right there.
Wow, what a story. What a story. And of course, you ended up finishing 12th. Correct me if is that correct? Okay.
In the heat.
In the heat, yes. 12th in the heat that you ran in the Olympics. And wow, that is just an incredible story. And then fast forward, I wish we had an hour to spend with you today. But as we fast forward, first of all, we have to stop before 2016 in Rio. 2015 was a very special year as well, because you and Drew got married.
Yes.
So just, talk about that partnership that grew from a professional relationship to a personal one, and everything that goes along with that.
Yeah, I mean, so it just started in 2012, right around the time of making the Olympic team. So that was just kind of like, in lots of ways, that moment and that period of time was just like an exciting beginning to this next phase of life that it kind of has become what my life is now. And yeah, I mean, we just work so well together. I'd been his assistant coach for a few years at that point. And just, yeah, the way my approach is to my career as a runner, and the way he coaches, and then the friendship that developed in that, we're very much a team. And so it just kind of like bleeds over into every aspect of life. And we're just kind of like locked arms, taking on it all. And yeah, it's been, we got married in 2015 and living the dream together now in Flagstaff.
Absolutely. Up there in Flagstaff, we'll touch on that, but let's keep chronological here. 2016 Rio Olympics come up, and lo and behold, you qualify and you make your second Olympics. Talk about being at a second Olympics versus the first. What were the differences? How would you compare, contrast? Obviously, cities were much different with Rio versus London, but how did those games compare for you?
Yeah. It's funny. So when I left London, I was so inspired. I just was like, couldn't believe the whole thing was just a whirlwind. I couldn't believe that I was an Olympian and that I'd made it to the Olympics. And it was so thrilling. And I'd signed the contract with New Balance and I was going to be able to be a full-time athlete. And so I was so excited for the 4 years that stretched out before. I knew in my heart, like, I'm going back to the Olympics. I'm going to be a better athlete when I get there. And I was just very motivated. And I worked really hard over those 4 years and I made a ton of progress. I won 2 national titles and I moved up to the 10,000 and I'd PR'd in every event from 800 through 10,000 and even took on the half marathon. And so in 2016, I really felt like I'd done all the work and was ready. And then in Rio, I did not have a good race at all in that first round. And I ended up finishing 12th in my heat and basically leaving the Olympics with the exact same result as in 2012. And so whereas in 2012, it was just like thrilling and, and motivating, 2016, I felt way more disappointed because I'd done all that work and I'd made all that improvement, but with the idea that it was going to really be showcased in Rio. And then it didn't come through in that moment.
Yeah. Well, the first time is always just the wonder of the moment, right? And then you're a hardcore professional by 2016. As you look at this one here and assuming the Olympics happen and you're able to qualify, what goal have you set in terms of what you want to do in 2021 as it pertains to Tokyo?
It's a little bit abstract to say it this way. And hopefully by the time I get there, I'll be able to quantify it more or make it more of a measurable goal. But really, I want this Olympic experience to be the best one. And so I do mean that in terms of the result. But I also mean that in terms of I just didn't handle Rio very well. I think my expectations maybe were a little too high for myself. And then I had kind of a preconceived idea of what the Olympics should be based on London and Rio, without casting any stones. Rio just didn't quite live up to it, where London had set the bar. Yeah. And so I didn't handle it very well. And so, my hope for this Olympics would be that when I get home from them, I can feel really good about the entire experience, that both in terms of my performance and then in the way that I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Now you mentioned you live in Flagstaff. Elevation's roughly 6,000 or 7,000 feet there. Mm-hmm. Is it a training thing or do you just love living there? Well,
it's just that I love living here really, but I found Flagstaff for the training. It is a training thing that originally brought me here. But there's just an amazing, abundant network of fire roads to train on. And then the ability to descend to lower elevations really easily so that when I want to do workouts that are going to replicate what I'm racing down at sea level, I can do that. But yeah, I like the lifestyle here. It's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly is beautiful there. Kim, before, you wrap up your career, the Olympics in 2021 isn't your final step in terms of your racing. You're looking to really kind of move on and like you said, longer distances, eventually the marathon, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's just part of the ongoing process with your career. I was looking at your half marathon time and correct me if I'm wrong. Is your personal best 109? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I did a half marathon 2 years ago for the first time. My time was 2:11. I was trying to calculate that out. I was like, you may have lapped me if you've got a full marathon there. And I thought I was really running well too. And I trained for weeks for that thing. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to run that. And your best marathon time is at 2:41. Am I right on that too? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How it's longer term, but how much in terms of, you're always setting personal best. How much do you think you could trim off that marathon time? Or do you?
Well, I hope a lot.
Where would you want to get, I guess?
Yeah. So when I made my marathon debut, my goal was 2:28. And I really suffered at the end. And so I went through halfway on pace for 2:28 and then ended up at 2:41. So, I mean, that's the marathon, and that's kind of the challenge ahead is learning how to master it. But yeah, I definitely, my maybe reaching goal, but I'll go ahead and tell you anyway, my secret dream is to run 2:24 for the marathon, which might sound a little arbitrary, but it's because my PR in the mile is 4:24. And so when this is all over, I just like the idea of saying that my range went from 4:24 in the mile to 2:24 in the marathon.
Hey, it's a good way to set a goal, as good as any. As we wrap up here with Kim Conley, again, this Overtime Zoomcast being brought to you by UC Davis Health. If you're looking for ways to optimize your performance, stay healthy, and prevent injuries, put UC Davis sports medicine experts on your team. Learn more about our specialty care at health.ucdavis.edu/Aggies. Just a couple of things. We're talking about health and performance. How do you keep yourself in peak performance in terms of all the recovery, health, nutrition? Obviously, you have a sponsor with New Balance, and that's helped in a huge way. But just talk about all of those other elements of being a runner besides just the training itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's having that whole team around you, which started in college at UC Davis. Like you have that with access to like nutrition and your ATCs and people. But it's after I left the college setting, I had to create that for myself as a professional athlete. And I still work with Paul Solitsky, who's my sports psychologist while I was at UC Davis. So he's been a longtime member of my team. But I have a chiropractor. I have a couple actually chiropractors that I work with here in Arizona. I just teamed up with a performance nutritionist to help me refine the nutrition side of things leading up to the Olympic trials. And so like you keep all those things on point for sure.
Did you ever work with Dr. Liz Applegate?
Oh yeah, she made a really big difference in my career. She was definitely one of the bigger influences outside the actual coaching staff.
Her Nutrition 10 class changed my life when I took it as an undergrad. So
yeah.
I can only imagine how she influenced your life or has influenced your life. We'll leave it at this. I always try to throw this out here. You obviously, I can tell by just talking with you, Kim, that you had a very special UC Davis experience. And I'm not even necessarily talking about track and field. I can tell that just you loved life at UC Davis and being a student, and you embraced what the culture is all about. If you had some parting words for somebody watching, whether it's a student athlete or a prospective student or just somebody, if you could impart that, what would you say about your experience you would want other people to know, or what you would love to share about UC Davis to others?
I mean, I think that it's such a great community. And then within it, like you can find, like anyone can find kind of like that your cohort and your people that really kind of like define and make that experience special. But yeah, it's just such an ideal place to live and go to college for those years, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Kim, I really appreciate the time. I wish we had more. I know you've got a trade as well, but your story to me, it is the Rocky story of UC Davis. I just love it. I love rooting for people who continually improve and be counted out sometimes and thought of as underdogs. In a lot of cases, sometimes Aggies are, especially in that era from Division II to Division I. I lived through that as well. And for everything that you've done, both on and off racing, it's pretty amazing story. So thank you very much for sharing it with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And best of luck. We'll be looking. I can't wait to watch in July in Tokyo. Can't wait to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Aggie Overtime Zoomcast. We appreciate you watching, and we'll have more great stories coming your way in the near future. And of course, until then, go Aggies.